If you're considering the idea of launching a podcast for your business, or maybe you've already started on that journey but aspire to up your game, then this video is for you. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with professional podcaster Tim Stone, co-host of the incredibly successful Things I Learned Last Night podcast. We're about to uncover the steps he took to bring his show all the way to top 44 on Apple's comedy charts, and talk about the practical steps you can take to see success in your own podcast. So hit the subscribe button and let's dive in. All right, allow me to introduce you to Tim Stone, the friendly face behind Space Tim Media, a podcast production company that's all about creating the highest quality content for mainly B2B brands. You might also know him as the co-host of the hilarious Things I Learned Last Night podcast, which has climbed to an impressive number 44 on Apple's comedy charts and has reached over 60 million social media fans. I think to say that Tim is an expert in this area would be an understatement. Tim is also the creative mastermind behind successful campaigns for small names you may have heard of, like Google, Lenovo, Shopify, and many more. He's got a passion for the art of blending content and marketing, especially when it comes to helping brands find their own voice in this oversaturated, content-driven world. It's a lot. So he specializes in blending those two things together. He is now living in Kansas City, Missouri, and mark my words, he will fight anyone who thinks their barbecue is better than Kansas City's barbecue. And we actually have a sign up that we put on our website for Tim's availability to throw down. Just visit Ankerpoint/TimStoneBarbecue/fight me, bro, if you're interested. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, that's great. I'll one up you. I'll take a note after this. I'll go buy fight Kansas City barbecue, something like that. I'll buy an actual domain for this.
There will be a domain, and you need to sign up, and there will be some interesting content on there. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to figure it out what it's going to be later.
That's great. Kansas City barbecue is better. It's just better. I don't know. I'm sorry. If you're in Texas or Carolina or Tennessee, your barbecue's not the same. We're better.
It's not the same. I will admit to that. I got some good barbecue here in PCB, but one of my events that I went to as a kid in youth group, we did a taste of two cities. I lived in Springfield, grew up in Springfield. And we went to Kansas City and we went to St. Louis and tried the two best barbecue places according to someone at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the name, so I should have done my research. But and I don't remember which one I like better, but I do remember them being incredible.
Yes.
So
it's the place, man. It's the place.
I'll take your word for it. So, Tim, you and I both attended Evangel.
I just visited. I didn't actually attend. I visited for 4 years. They're like, "Can you leave?"
I feel like I visited. I went for 1 year. I did all the classes that, the gen eds that I had to do. I didn't do any of the fun classes.
Yeah.
So I feel like I visited, but you got your bachelor's in arts and biblical studies.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And how did you get started doing podcasts? You and Jaron were great friends during college, right?
Yeah.
And that's how that partnership happened.
We met in college. We've been great friends for over 10 years now. And we are actually roommates in college. Like towards the end, we bought a house. We didn't buy a house. We rented a house. But we were living together. And I, in college, had this moment where I realized, man, we waste a lot of time every night on social media. Like we lay down, we're like, oh, I'm so tired. And we lay down and then we spend an hour and a half to 2 hours just scrolling on social. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm wasting so much time here. And I'm not happy doing it. So I started this thing in college where I would go to Wikipedia and they have a random button and it'll just feed you some random article. And I would just deep dive as far as I could in whatever topic I landed on. And since we were roommates, in the morning, we'd be getting ready for class or making breakfast or whatever. And I just tell him about the things I learned last night. And he, being a comedian, would make fun of me the whole time. And we always talked about, we're like, one day we should start just recording these conversations because they were always really funny. And so fast forward a couple years later in 2017, we were both living up here in Kansas City. we knew a guy who owned a studio, and he was like, "Hey, $50 a month, and you can use the space."
Oh,
We're like,
dang.
"You got a
$50.
deal." Yeah.
That's
We're
great.
like, "That's a deal." So we took a shot in October 2017, and we've never looked back. So it wasn't great at the
Wow.
beginning. We still have all those episodes up. You can hear how bad we were when we started. But over time, we kind of got in the hang of things and figured some things out, found some success, and now we're kind of paying that forward and helping businesses use the principles and things we learned to grow a show of their own.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna dive deeper into the podcast, and I have so many questions about it. I've been listening to a lot of them recently on my morning runs. Morning runs. I have morning runs. That sounds wonderful. But yeah, I guess just to get a little rundown of the how things are going to go. We're going to be talking about the benefit of podcasting, talking about the pros and cons. We want to dive next into your podcast, the highly successful things I learned last night. I want to get some inside scoops, some never heard before stuff here. And then we'll end off with some good practical takeaways. If people are like, yep, Tim, you convinced me. Let's do it. How do I get started? So we're going to do it at the end so we can build some anticipation. You know what I'm saying?
I love that.
And then actually, I have some fans sent in some questions.
Oh, that's great.
So
I'm excited for that.
yeah. So I'm going to wait for the end on that one too, just because, hashtag marketing. So
I'm excited for those.
Yeah. So it all started about a week and a half ago, and I saw a video of your face. I'm like, okay, unmute. And you said, hey, you should start a podcast. Your business should start a podcast. And so what I did was I started a podcast to ask you a question, which is, why should I start a podcast, Tim?
That's a great question.
And there's a pitch, like, give us your best pitch. If someone's like, hey, what's so good about podcasting? Why should I, allocate some of my resources, marketing resources towards podcasting? How would you convince them?
Well, I mean, first off, I would just say, you didn't have to do all this. You could have just watched the rest of the video, right? Like, you don't have to start a whole podcast to ask you the question.
Well, I wanted to. Yeah, you're right. It's a good intro, though, Tim. Just don't steal my thunder here.
That's good. No, I think podcasting is a hugely valuable tool for businesses. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that come from it, but just to name a few, at the end of the day, in today's era, every business needs content. There's no way around it. You just need content for your marketing collateral, for social, for email campaigns, for ad campaigns, for your website. You just need content. It's the name of the game in the modern world, no matter what line of work your company works in. The challenge with that is content's hard. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, but podcasting can help you get that content really, really quick compared to the amount of effort that you would have to put forth for traditional media. You can sit down for an hour in a conversation like this and you can get all your content for the month, which is incredibly powerful. And it frees you up to do the things that you're actually good at and do the things that you actually care about, which is run your business. So it's a valuable tool on the content side of things, but it's also a powerful tool because it's a networking tool. You get opportunities to meet all these people that you want to meet, that you want to have these conversations with, or people that could eventually become your customers. So you kind of have this easy in with people by having a podcast. It also can build you an audience that you can monetize, and it can provide revenue for your organization. There's so many different benefits that come from a podcast, and you can kind of lean into all these different goals with them. But at the end of the day, I think probably what I would say the biggest benefit is that content machine that you're generating, while also having a couple side dishes in there that are providing value for your business in a lot of different ways. You just need it. You need content, and podcasting is a great way to do it.
That's definitely true. We do marketing for a bunch of different clients, and doing marketing for them, having content for them is easier than it is for ourselves. Because they already have the content. I'm gathering it. For us, I'm basically, I don't know. I started trying to push social media pretty hard the last couple of weeks. I mean, we have a pretty good client list, so I haven't really needed to market ourselves. But I'm like, okay, I need to get the ball rolling.
Mhm.
And creating content for us was like, it's a lot. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree with all of those points. Is there any case where you would be like, huh, yeah, podcasting may not be the best for you? Like,
Yeah.
this guy's like, I'm a sheep shearer. Like, why would I start a podcast? But I'm trying to find more. I don't know. That's maybe not the greatest example, but like, is there any sort of downside or case where you'd be like, you know what? Maybe podcasting isn't the right avenue for you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would say there's a downside to podcasting. And I think in any business, there's a situation where you could find value and find a reason to get into podcasting. The uh, the question is, what are your goals? And if you can align a podcast with your goals, then I think that it could be valuable and it's something for you to pursue. So I guess really I would say there's 5 potential goals for a podcast, and I kind of hinted at them for a second during that last question, but I can dive in a little deeper on those. I would say the 5 goals are it's a networking tool, it's an audience building tool, it's a content generating machine, it's an audience building machine, or it's kind of an internal team building and training mechanism. If you can fit into any of those goals, then I would say that it makes a lot of sense for you to have a podcast. If you don't, then maybe that's a part where you might think. But a little bit about each of those, so that way I'm not just hanging on a couple interesting terms. A networking tool. I briefly mentioned it there for a second ago, but it is really tough to get meetings with people nowadays. A lot of people are asking for people for meetings all the time. And especially now that we have video calls available to us, it's even harder. People's time is at a premium. Getting an opportunity to meet people is tough. And so it can be a great networking tool to have a podcast because people are more open to it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
People are open to, because at the end of the day, like, what is a podcast? A podcast is an opportunity for someone to come on your show and talk about how much they know about something. And everybody loves that. Everybody loves to do that. So if you have those people that you want to work with, those people that you want in your network, or those people that you think could become customers or clients for your business, a podcast might be your foot in the door. And it's a great opportunity to reach out. Instead of saying, hey, will you listen to my sales pitch? It's, hey, will you come be on my podcast? That is a much easier way to get in the door with people and begin that conversation with someone. So there's value there. The other set of things is that content machine. I briefly mentioned it a second ago, but content's hard and every business needs content. And at the end of the day, you can spend hours and hours and hours every week or build a full content team on your roster that will sit down and plan out content every single month. Or you can have a podcast. And in a podcast, you have some prep work that comes up. You got to prep your content. You got to prep your guests. You got to record the show. But then after that, your post-production is the same as you would have if you built a full content plan, but you had significantly less work leading up to it. So a show like this, I think in a show like this, I would say you get your long form audio podcast. You also get a long form video that you can throw up on YouTube. You can also cut that into 3 to 5 TikTok or Reels type videos for you to throw out on those platforms. You also can cut it into probably 3 or 4 shorter 4 to 5 minute videos for social, for ad campaigns, for specific use cases throughout your business. You get a blog post out of it. You can throw the transcription in there, get some really good SEO. You can take that blog post, take each paragraph of that blog post. Now you've got LinkedIn posts throughout the month just from that podcast, and then you can take the headlines, the meat of each of those paragraphs. You could throw those in tweets. You can repurpose those tweets for Instagram stories, for Facebook stories, and then you can take those paragraphs as well as you can throw them in email campaigns. With 1 hour of a session like this, you've got your whole content for the entire month.
Right.
You can get so much out of a podcast if you just do the work to squeeze it all out of it.
Man.
So all of that stuff you could do. It's the same amount of work to produce all that stuff as if you didn't have a podcast, but the planning is significantly less. It would take you so long to plan the amount of campaigns and content for social and all the different platforms if you didn't have a podcast. But if you have a podcast, you're getting all that out of there just by default. Another big goal you could have is building an audience. Podcast audiences are some of the most valuable audiences, and there's two reasons why. One, podcast audiences are so loyal. The people in those, the people that listen to a podcast, they build a relationship with the hosts in their brain because they spend time with you every week listening to you talk and listening to you tell stories and engage with people. They know a lot about you. It's the same sort of parasocial relationship that people get from social media, but it's deeper in a podcast. And so because of that, an audience in a podcast is so much more valuable. And the proof is in the pudding. If you look at social media advertising, your social media ads, you're charging, you're making, or they're charging somewhere between $1 and $3 in those campaigns for X amount of impressions. That same number of impressions in a podcast, those are starting at $20 for the impressions. So the value, the businesses are spending so much more because they know they convert higher. The people trust the people that they listen to on social media or on podcasts, where they don't trust social media listeners as much. So you can build an audience that trusts you, an audience that's willing to spend money on you and do what you ask them to do if you build a podcast audience. And what's nice about that is it's a little easier to build than a lot of other audiences, like a social or a YouTube audience, because in those audiences, because conversion rates are so low, you have to build a massive audience in the hundreds of thousands to the millions for you to be able to see the type of return on your investment that you're looking for. Where in social, because people are so committed to the people they listen to, you don't need hundreds of thousands. You might not even need tens of thousands to meet your business goals. So that's a lot easier of an audience to build. It's still challenging, and that's probably the most difficult goal you can have in podcasting, but it's an attainable goal, and it's something that's a valuable goal. So that's a third way. So it's a networking tool, it's an audience growth tool, or it's a content machine. The fourth thing that I would say is a lead gen tool. Lead magnets are important. People use those for a reason. And it's an opportunity for you, again, to every week sit down and talk about a topic that you can then convert into some type of a lead magnet. So after this conversation, you can go and you can create a PDF of here's the 5 tips to start your podcast, throw it up on your website. You can add a call to action and say, hey, in this episode, we talked about starting a podcast. I've got a free PDF. You can go to my website, 5 tips to start your podcast. Capture their email, send them the PDF, and now you got someone who's a highly qualified lead that you can reach out and sell to in the future. And it's that person already trusts you, already knows you know what you talk about, and they might take that PDF, they might just do it on their own, or you might be able to sell to them and have a qualified lead. And then the fifth one that's a little bit undervalued. I don't think I've seen really anybody talking about this, but I think it's very important for organizations, is it could be a training tool and a culture building tool, especially in a world of remote work, and especially in a world if you're in an organization where there are a couple lines of direct reports underneath you in your organizational chart. It becomes really, really tough to, from the top, teach culture, and it becomes really tough, especially introducing new processes, because anybody needs about 7 touch points with something for them to really get it. So if you have a new process, they have to hear that 7 times for them to really get it. If you got a culture thing or core value you want them to get, they need to hear that 7 times for them to really get it. And a podcast might be a good way to interact with your team to help them get those touch points on a regular basis. And it's easily digestible for them. They can listen to it on their commute. They can listen to it on the run. If your team is in a factory, they can listen to that while they work. The kind of working with their hands type of stuff where it's not highly mental work. They can listen to that and they can start to digest those core values through that medium. And you can dispel information, but there's also the video options. There's another way for people to digest that content and learn the things that you want them to learn and pick up the systems and processes and culture pieces. And it also kind of gives them some face time with you if you're the leader of an organization, without having to go out and have face time with your organization if you're in a large organization. Because there is that parasocial relationship that comes from a podcast. And so people become more loyal. They feel like they know you. They feel like they get time with you. And it only takes an hour of your time versus 10 hours of your time walking the factory floor.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of value there. So it could be an internal training tool. It could be a content machine. It could be a networking tool. It could be an audience growth tool. It could be a lead gen tool, or it could be multiple of those. You can stack some of those things on top of each other and get the benefits out of each of those. So if any of those sound like something in your business where you're like, hey, I could see that being beneficial, I could see that having a return for us, then I think there's a reason for you to start a podcast. This is almost always true for a B2B brand. For a B2B brand, there's almost always a case for one of these things for a B2B brand. B2C is a little tougher in some of those things because you can't quite do a podcast for your B2C brand if you're Coca-Cola talking about why we do soda and why soda is something that should be a part of your diet. Everybody knows it shouldn't. So they're not going to listen to that and be like, man, they got a point. I'm going to go buy some Coke today. But you could, if you're a B2C brand, you could do a show that's more entertaining, build an audience that way, and then just have call to actions in there where you're saying, hey, by the way, this podcast is brought to you by Coca-Cola. It's not called the Coca-Cola podcast. It's just an interesting podcast that people listen to and enjoy with interesting hosts. And then you have call to actions in there selling the product. So for a B2C brand, I would really say the biggest value is building an audience and then monetizing that audience through owned media that you can advertise to, an owned audience that you can advertise to, or that internal training machine. Everything else is a little less important for a B2C brand. But it's tough to get a B2C brand to be cool with launching a podcast that's just
Do you have any examples of what? Do you know of any successful B2C brands?
That's interesting. I don't think I know of anywhere a B2C brand is running the show. I think there are a handful of shows out there where a B2C brand has put their name on the show. So they're a title sponsor. Okay. So it's X podcast brought to you by Coca-Cola or something like that, where they just went and found something that already existed and monetized it for themselves. And that's definitely an option for a B2C brand. It's significantly less work for you. Might cost a little more, maybe, depending on what show you buy into. But that is a method. For B2C, advertising in podcasts is hugely valuable, though. Right off the bat, you can go. There's tons of ad platforms. If you're B2C, Gumball is one that we work with specifically. That's fantastic. Gumball.fm. They sell ads in podcasts, and so you can,
I was going to ask you about that later. Yeah. Because I always wondered about how to, like, if you wanted to advertise through your podcast. I hear several throughout yours. I was like, how do people approach you? Do you approach people? I know there's probably platforms. I've seen something like that where you can kind of almost sign up to be to have someone sponsor your podcast. But I wasn't sure the steps to take.
There's lots of ways to do it. Gumball FM, Ad Results Media are a couple that sell direct to podcasts. So those are the ones where if you hear a podcaster where the host is reading the ad, it's probably from a service like that. There's a bunch of them out there. Those are a couple of the bigger ones that we've worked with. So that's typically where that's coming from. But there's other services like Spotify Audience Network where you can record the ad yourself as an organization, and then they run that ad kind of like a typical radio ad that you might hear. It's the same sort of concept. And then the cost on those is a lot less because you don't have the host reading those. That might be a good way to kind of dip your feet in the water. But for us, it comes through one of those networks that we work with. But we do some of our own outreach, and then we do have some direct outreach where brands just reach out to us directly and skip that agency. But yeah, that's kind of how that works.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is incredibly valuable because a lot of people, like, for instance, you talked about how it feels like people know you, which is kind of true because I was listening to your podcasts for a couple of weeks now. I wasn't listening to before. I apologize, Tim. I've heard a few, but I was started listening to it. I'm like, I feel like I already know Tim. I don't even need to do the podcast. It's not for me. But it's crazy how often people think their message is clearly out there just because they have a clear understanding of it internally. They're like, or even in your team, people think their core values, their message, why they do what they do is clear. But like you said, there's 7 points of you have to mention it a bunch. Like you have to keep repeating.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't do that. They just assume. So this is definitely, I can definitely see how that would be really, really valuable
Yeah.
um, to start sharing that your core values, why you do what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of businesses are like, "Well, it's in the manual. Don't you know it?" I challenge
I wrote it down at the beginning.
I challenge if you're a business owner, I challenge you, go ask your team today, like in your meeting, or maybe in one-on-ones. Schedule some one-on-ones and just ask, be like, "Hey, what's our mission statement?" I think you're gonna be surprised how many people get that right.
Yeah. If you
Like
don't know it, you're fired.
some people might have bits and pieces of it, but I think you're going to be surprised. A lot of people aren't going to be anywhere near what you think it is, unless you've already
No?
spent time really drilling it into them.
Well,
And
man,
so, I feel like this could be valuable in that aspect.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's the fact that it's easy to even forget as a leader when
Mm-hmm.
you get your head down in the game and you're doing all the tasks that you need to do for clients. You're like, oh goodness, like planning has been a big thing for me and my company. It's like we're down in the weeds, which is a good in some cases, but we need to start planning big picture, and it's easy to
Mm-hmm.
lose sight of that when you're go go go. So if that's true for leaders, how much more true is it for your team and people who don't
Absolutely.
even know you? So
Yeah.
that's valuable stuff. Let's dive into your podcast. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have seen a ton of success. Like you said earlier, you started this in 2017 as roommates while you're still in college. I didn't know that part. That's pretty interesting. You guys were doing this just for fun. Was Jaron already doing stuff on the side, like
Yeah. So
comedy?
if you don't know, if you're listening, Jaron is a comedian. He actually travels,
Yes,
does it
thank
full
you.
time. He's all over the place doing shows. And I went on his first handful of tours with him, and so we had a whole show plan that was a little bit of a mess. But we got a van, we went out, and we had different segments that both of us would do. And so we had been working together on stuff for a long, long time. But he had probably been doing comedy for probably, I don't know, 3 to 4 years when we started our show, and for
Okay.
probably about maybe a year, maybe two, he was full time at comedy at that point. But his audience was significantly smaller than it is now. Now he's got a massive audience, and now he's able to do some pretty huge shows. But at that time, he was doing it, but it was kind of one of those things where it was like at Thanksgiving, they're like, "Oh, are you still doing that comedy thing? Like, when are you gonna
Yeah.
get a job?"
Or
Like
did you
that's
get
kind
a
of
real job? Yeah.
yeah. He was on the tipping point at the time when we launched. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it is incredibly successful. How do you think it like obviously you guys have been doing it since 2017, so longevity, consistency, but what made it so successful? Like what intentional steps did you guys take in order to help make that one of the highest rated comedy podcasts on Apple charts for a while there?
Uh, everything. Where do I begin?
Eat.
It
All right,
was
let's move on.
it was
No,
a
it's good.
lot of it was a lot of different things. I think. I mean, I think there's a lot of effort that went into it. We spent a lot of time figuring out what was our show, what was our content, what made it engaging, what made it work, and we really obsessed about that. And trying to figure out how do we make this something that people actually want to listen to. And when we really perfected that, we started to say, okay, now we've got something that people will want to listen to. How do we make sure that they do? Like, how do we make sure that they find it? And how do we find that audience? I think that's something that a lot of people miss, especially like creatives or talented people in anything. You can kind of start to think that, oh, I've got this skill or I've got this talent and that's all I need. But the
Mhm.
reality is, you need a lot more than that. You have to be able to sell yourself. You have to be able to market yourself. You have to get that in front of the right eyes. And I think a lot of people miss that step. It's like, you're a great singer, and there's tons of those on Spotify. There's tons of the
Mhm.
people on Spotify that are way better than anybody in the Billboard Top 200, way better. But they're never going to get there because they don't know how to get there. Getting there takes more than just your talent. It takes being able to market yourself, being able to get it in front of the right audiences. And so in 2020, somewhere in the middle of 2020, we said, hey, I think we've got this figured out. I think we got our show in a lane where we want to be. And we kind of put together a strategy to market it, to do organic social growth was really the big side of things. We said if we can build a show where we can have some content that pops off on social, and we can build a website with a strong blog with strong SEO to where people see this and then they go try to find what this is from, we're the
Mhm.
first result on Google. If we can
Right.
do that, then I think we can have a lot of success. And so
Mhm.
Jaron is really good with social media. He's really good with content. And so he spent a lot of effort figuring out social, figuring out our strategy for that. And he started executing that play. While I actually have a background in marketing and in web development and SEO. So I built us a new website and I put together all the best SEO practices and started writing blog posts for every episode and just pumping them full
Wow.
of everything you need to succeed on Google. And then we started having it where we would have episodes like the blog post for an episode land on the first page of Google. And then we would have social videos kick off and get 100, 200,000 views. What was interesting is we were having a hard time getting those to sync up. Where I was like, oh, this was really, really successful, but this one wasn't there, so we didn't see much of it. But over
Right.
time, we started to find that spot where we were in sync, and this social clips would pop off, and then we would also be the first result on Google, and we would see a
Hmm.
huge boost in our audience from that. Probably the biggest example of that is we did an episode in 2021 about eels. And at the time, we were probably somewhere in the ballpark of 4,000, 4,500 downloads an episode is what we were doing. And we put out this video about eels. It went viral on social media. And then that episode was the first result on Google. And we saw that jump to 112,000 downloads. And so it was a
Wow.
big boost for us. And then we've seen that story play out a handful of times since then, where we were able to sync that up, where people found us on social and then they found us on Google and then they became long-term
Right.
listeners for us. So that was kind of our play. It's a very simplified version of it. I think a lot of things went into it,
Obviously, yeah.
and there's a
Was
lot of consistency, but yeah.
What was it like? So before you started intentionally marketing it, because you have a podcast, it goes out there. I don't even know how the algorithms work. I mean, you're obviously telling your friends are
Mhm.
telling your friends. Jaron was touring a little bit at the time. You
Yeah.
started in 2017, so there's
Yeah.
that as well. How much of a boost did you see from when you started it? You had about 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Until 2020, and then you started really working at marketing it. You created a website, and how much of a boost did you see from the first 3 years to from 2020 until now?
Oh, I mean, that's is an insane difference, honestly. Because when we started, in all honesty, for me, it was a hobby. Like I had another career that I was focused on, and I did never expected it to be something that even could become a career. Like it was just, oh,
Yeah,
this is just a fun thing we do. Uh, Obviously, for Jaron being a comedian, it was kind of an extension of his career. But it
right.
was just that it was an extension of his career. It was just another thing to have. But it wasn't something that was profitable by any means. We were spending way more money and time on it than we were getting back from it. And then in 2020, we built this plan, and it probably took us, I don't know, 6 to 8 months to see that plan really work. We had to execute on that for a long time before it meant anything.
Right,
um,
yeah.
and then we had a big hole to dig ourselves out of because we spent a lot of money that we weren't seeing any return on for a while. But now it's wild. I mean, this space we're in, the podcast pays for it. We have a full studio. We've got office. We've got a team of 7 people. We're producing
Oh, that is
shows
amazing,
for
man.
other companies. And then, I mean, we've worked on well over 100 brand campaigns for, I mean, you mentioned some of the names at the beginning, some pretty big name brands. And that's opened up doors for really, really cool projects that wouldn't have been there if it weren't for it. So it has been, I don't know, it really has been life changing to kind of take that step to say, hey, here's what we think we need to do for this to be successful, and then to work at it for months where we're like, I don't know if this is working. uh, and then it did. And so now
Yeah,
we kind of understand a little bit more about it, but yeah, it's cool.
that's amazing, man. I want to move on to the practical stuff. I had actually a bunch more questions for this podcast, or like your podcast, but I don't want to take up all your time. I do want to ask a few more. Take us behind the scenes real quick
Yeah.
of a typical episode of things I learned last night. How does that play out? Do you come in with a story Jaren is coming in cold, he doesn't know anything, and you just start explaining it to him, do you plan out some jokes ahead of time where Jaren's like, say this, and I'm going to say this, it's going to be hilarious? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so for the show, it's interesting now is a little different than when we started because now we have a Patreon and we have supporters that are kind of on the journey with us. And so something we started doing recently, something that's always been true, is we get so much content recommended to us from our listeners and from our patrons.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I have a backlog of like 200 content ideas that have been recommended to us that I need to research and see if that'll make a good episode. And so we actually do once a week, I hop on a Discord video call with our patrons, and we deep dive. I share my screen. We deep dive the topics
What a great
together.
idea. That's awesome.
And we all research together. It's a super fun little patron benefit that we have. And so then we figure out what will work, and then I get an idea of what I'm going to do. And then when it comes time to shoot, we sit down, and Jaren has no idea what's going to happen. So it's set up just like those conversations around the breakfast table we used to have, where he has no idea what's going to happen today. I just come in and I'm like, hey man, have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
And then we dive in. And so there's no prep. He has no idea what we're going to talk about. He doesn't have any jokes keyed up. Every once in a while, I might have some jokes where I'm like, oh, that would be a funny thing to tee up for there. But honestly, very rarely do I even have jokes teed up. I just have kind of an outline of the topic, the content that we hit. Because our show it's an educational comedy podcast, and educational and very strong air quotes, like very strong air quotes. Because really,
I've learned a lot. Honestly,
I mean, you can learn some things. There's some things you can learn, but honestly, the show is kind of a play on, like, just right now. It's all over the place. You got just two white dudes with a podcast acting like they know everything. And it is like I learn my stuff the night before on Wikipedia. Like I don't know what I'm talking about in this show.
Which makes it awesome, though.
Yeah, that's kind of the joke. Like I don't really know what I'm talking about. It's kind of funny. You see me fumble through stuff sometimes, and you'll learn some things. But more than anything, like you'll laugh and like you'll have fun. You'll hear a lot of jokes. There's a lot of bits. You'll hear us laugh a lot. So if you like listening to people laugh, that's like 90% of our show.
Yeah. Well, dude, I listened to Bobby Dunbar this morning.
Oh gosh,
on my morning runs, and it was man, that was so interesting.
It's a wild story.
What a crazy story. What's like one of your favorite episodes? If it was like, hey, listen to this episode if you want to start off.
Easily the 1904 Olympic Marathon. That was the first year they had, or it might have been the second or third, something like that, the year that they had a marathon at the Olympics. And in this marathon, there was a guy who took a nap in the middle of the race, and he still came in second place. It was a wild.
Is that where the tortoise and the hare came from?
It might be. I mean, it was a wild event.
That's crazy.
It actually involves like arsenic. There's like some crazy twists and turns in it. And we had some really, really funny bits that we went down and jokes that came out of that episode. So that's one of the most interesting one. Another one that I really enjoyed was the Richmond TV vigilante. There was a time, I want to say 2018, where Richmond, Virginia, a bunch of people in the neighborhood woke up to like box TV sets on their front porch, and it was almost the entire neighborhood. And they looked on the Ring security camera, and the night before, a dude walked up to pretty much every door in this neighborhood with a box TV set and set it on their porch. But the twist is he was wearing a box TV set, like a helmet. And it's like you couldn't see his face, and you just saw this TV man rock up and set a TV on people's porch. And he did this in multiple neighborhoods over the course of a few months, and no one ever figured out who he was. And no one figured out.
It's the weirdest.
It's a weird story. So that was
like if it was some sort of marketing thing, like, hey, guess what? I actually do this. That would be brilliant. But is he still unknown, or do we need to listen to podcasts to find out, or what?
Yeah, you can listen to find out. I'll tell you, I don't know. I don't know who he is.
That's crazy, man. Yeah. Wow, that is wild. I would say one of my favorite I listened to so far was Action Park. I think is what it's called. That was insane. That honestly sounds like an episode of Ed, and Eddie. Like it sounds too good to be true in a lot of ways, but then obviously very, very dangerous.
It's a very 1980s theme park.
Dude, but it's the stuff you dream of as a kid. Like, what if we had something like this? And
what if we had a water slide with a loop-de-loop?
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, so definitely go listen to all those.
Yeah.
Let's really quickly dive into some practical getting started questions, because if you've convinced a listener that's saying, okay, and honestly, you've 100% convinced me. I started this podcast, but this might have been the only episode. I'm going to keep going because you've convinced me. But
Good. Perfect.
if you've convinced somebody, what advice would you tell them if they said, okay, I want to start a podcast today? What do I need to get started? Is it going to cost a lot of money? Do I need to go get a roommate and rent a house next to Evangel? Like, what is the process of getting started?
What's nice is in 2020, 2021, somewhere in that ballpark, podcasting really blew up. Podcasting has been around for a long time, but it's
Yeah.
really, really blown up over the last few years, which means a lot of new technology and a lot of new products have come out for podcasting that have drastically decreased the cost of podcasting. 10 years ago, it would cost you a fortune to go. I don't want to say fortune, but it would cost you a lot to go get your mics, get your cameras, all your lighting, and then everything you need to produce a show. Now, if you can get a decent microphone on Amazon, you can get a little USB interface, get a decent microphone, get a decent like arm to mount your mic on. You could probably get out of there for $300 or less, and use tools like this to get online with your guest and get a show up and running. What I would say, kind of the things I would say to start, is obviously you need your gear. You need to learn how to edit. You need to learn how to do all the things that come with podcasting. But I would also challenge to say, hey, go figure out what is the goal of your show. Look at those 5 goals that I listed. What is the thing that you want this podcast to do? And start to engineer that show around that goal and figure out, okay, how do we reach that goal? What actually helps us reach that goal? What kind of content helps us reach that goal? And then go do some recon. What is out there? What shows are out there doing this kind of content? How are they doing it? How can I replicate that? How can I iterate on it and improve that for my use case? And how can I reach those audiences? Where are those people hanging out? And where can I get this in front of them? And what do I have to do that? Because at the end of the day, you, like I said before with singing, like, you can be talented, you can produce the best show ever, but if you can't figure out how to get it in front of the right people, then it's like just screaming into a void. There's no reason. It's a shame if someone's a really good singer and the only person they ever sing to is themselves. And so
And their
you need to
parents,
learn. You need to learn to be able to get that out to the right people. So I'd say don't stop just at figuring out how to do podcasting. Figure out how to market your podcast to get that in front of the right people, and figure out what the goal is, so that way those efforts are in sync. You're doing the right things at the right time to reach the goals that you have set out for your show.
And if you were to give a piece of advice as far as like, man, I wish I knew this when we started, is there anything new that you'd say?
I would say a couple quick things. First, be consistent. There's going to be a lot of late nights. There's going to be a lot of effort, a lot of work that you're going to put into this. That's going to feel like you're doing the wrong thing. And you might be doing the wrong thing sometimes, but it's going to feel like, hey, we're trying this thing and it's not quite kicking. It's not quite working. I think everything in life, I kind of describe it like a double helix, like DNA. There is one strand is your effort, one strand is your luck. And over time, like, you put all this effort in and it almost feels like you're pushing luck away from you. It's like you have a magnet and you got the reverse polarity, and you're putting all this effort in and you're not getting anywhere. And then all of a sudden you manage to like get that off that pole and flip it around. And then luck just comes right towards you. And in that moment, like, you have to be ready to swing for the fences. You have to be hit it, because you have that one moment where your effort and your luck cross paths. And if you miss, then you've got to do it all over again. But if you can put that effort in, put that hard work in, reverse that polarity, get luck to come your way, and you're ready to hit when it's ready to hit, then that's when the magic really starts to happen. But I think a lot of people, they quit right before they get that flip, right before that luck comes their way, or luck comes their way and they miss it. They weren't ready for it, and then they quit. But it's like, man, you can flip that back your way. You just gotta put that effort in. So there's a lot of moments, I think, in those early days where it felt like, man, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of effort I'm putting towards this, and I'm not seeing a lot of return on that effort. But eventually I did. And so I would say, don't stop, keep going, keep working, make sure like you learn your stuff, figure out, like, cause if you're you're working on something that's not something that's going to help, then it is wasted effort. But figure out
Right.
what the right things to do are, and then just do those every day. And
Yeah.
eventually, you're going to see luck come your way. And if you're ready to swing when that luck comes, then you'll see that success.
Consistency. And it sounds like find something you're really passionate about. Because
Absolutely.
if you hit rock bottom and you weren't passionate about it, you're going to give up.
Yeah.
So
That's
that thing you said in the very beginning, find your goal, find your why. Are you passionate about it? And if you are, you're going to see success, because you'd be surprised. I think everyone has in their mind, everyone is so much more successful than I am, and they're all trying their hardest. But really, not very many people probably put 100% in their effort into something they're passionate about. You'd be surprised how many people are thinking the same thing as you. So when you put effort towards it, you're going to see some success in one way or another. Like it may not be 44 top 44 on Apple's comedy charts, but you're gonna see success, even if it's just internally. But let's wrap this up. Well, first of all, if someone is interested in using your services, Space Tim Media, how can people get in contact with you and connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to do that, we have a website, spacetimmedia.com. There's a form on there that you can fill out, and we'll reach out to you and we can get the ball rolling. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn or anywhere and slide into my DMs. I'm just pretty much everywhere. I'm Tim Stone 182 on Instagram. I think I'm Timstagram 182.
Timstagram, love it.
LinkedIn should just be Tim Stone. I got to be a little bit more professional there.
Yeah. That's what I did. I slid into your DMs with a voice message, because it's a little more like, what is he going to say? You can't just ignore it after you read it. You have to listen to it.
Yeah.
But
I didn't even know you could send a voice message in Instagram. I was like, what is this?
Well, good. It worked.
Yeah, it did.
So let's get to the question from some fans. And when I say fans, I actually mean just one really big fan.
Cool.
And the question is, are you ready?
Yeah.
Have you ever been pepper sprayed?
I have.
And how did that make you feel? Mentally, physically, what happened?
Oh, it was the worst. I'll tell you that much. So this is a story that needs the story, because otherwise it's like, man, this guy got pepper. That makes you think, like, what were you doing where you got pepper sprayed? It really was that girl that I chased up to Kansas City. She's now my wife. Her name's Bree. Yeah. We met. We were at an Applebee's with a group of friends, and I noticed she had one of those little keychain pepper sprays on her keychain. And at the time, I always thought up until this that was a stupid self-defense thing, because I said, do you really think that's going to work? You think someone's going to attack you and you pepper spray them and they're going to be like, oh, sorry, I'll leave now. Like, I'd be like, you pepper spray me, I'm just going to attack you harder than I was attacking
Get more
you
mad.
before. And she was like, no, I think it would work. And I was like, I don't think it would. And we went back and forth for a little bit, and we decided, let's try it out. And so we went outside, and she ended up not being able to do it. Ironically, Jaron was the one who was like, I'll do it. So
gladly.
Yeah. So I stood there, I put my hands behind my back, and I leaned in like this, leaned in.
Oh my goodness, dude.
And he sprayed me across both my eyes, and I didn't feel it. I was like, honestly, man, I don't feel anything. He's like, let me get you another hit. And so he hits me again. And that's a good self-defense mechanism. I'll tell you what, it's very good.
Now
my mind has changed.
Things I learned last night. Yeah.
It was the worst. It put me to the ground. I couldn't open my eyes for probably 4 hours. I couldn't open my eyes.
Wow.
And then for probably a week and a half, my eyes just burned, and my tears would go down my face, and my tears would burn. It was horrible. It was horrible.
Wow.
Great self-defense
tool for your eyes.
Yeah.
Or it was 10 times worse.
It was so bad. But hey, it worked, because Bree, I think it kicked almost like a maternal instinct. She drove me back to my place and took care of me, and then the next day she texted me to check on me, and then we never stopped texting, and we got married.
Wow.
So,
and now
best
you're married.
Pickup line I've ever used. Why don't you mace
You recommend it, is what you're saying.
I don't recommend it, but it worked for me.
Right. That's amazing. I had texted Jaron last night or yesterday. I'm like, hey, do you have any questions or stories that would spark some good conversation? And I
He
didn't
would.
know what was going to happen. He just said, ask him about pepper spray if he's ever been pepper sprayed. I'm like, all right.
He would. He would.
Well,
Oh
awesome,
man.
man. Yeah, it's been an honor talking to you, dude. It's been really great. I've gotten a lot more information than I thought I would, and in a good way. I'm like, you talk way too much, Tim. No, I'm just kidding. It's been great.
Yeah.
And hopefully all the listeners learned a lot too. Yeah, next week we'll be discussing, is AI taking over the future of marketing? And so if you want to
Nice.
find out, in the next episode, we're going to have a marketing specialist and social media guru, John Deemer, on to talk about that. But yeah, Tim, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Hopefully we'll
I'm
get to
excited to
reconnect
listen.
again.
I'm excited to listen to this AI conversation. I definitely will tune back in next week.
Yeah. Don't you have an episode on AI?
We have a few,
Okay.
but I want to listen to what I said about AI. I'd listen to this guy. It sounds like he knows more about what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll have to listen to yours and we'll compare. So, well, thanks,
That's
Tim.
great.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.